Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, founder of FalcFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Scott Karasik, over at Sportsnaut. We are back this week to recap the Falcons' first preseason action of 2016 in a thrilling defeat of the Washington Redskins. We'll talk a little bit about some of the roster moves that the Falcons have made last week and maybe how that will affect some position battles. We will also give an update on what this final week of training camp has been like. And we'll preview a little bit of the Browns preseason game that's coming up this week. And as usual, we will answer you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, let's get these roster moves out of the way. Falcons made a couple of small, low-key sort of signings. But I'm curious if you think any of these moves have the potential to change some dynamics for potential back-end roster spots and practice squad roles. And those moves are the Falcons added Cyrus Gray, Jordan Walsh, and the cornerback Ryan White. And to make room for those guys, they cut David Mims with an injury settlement. Chris Mays is waived injured, which basically means if he clears waivers, he'll go on the IR, which is very likely. And they cut Shabazz Ahmed. So any of these moves stand out to you?
Not really. I mean, they all seem like pretty standard, simple camp moves for camp bodies. I don't think a single one of these guys ends up making the roster.
Okay. I do think Cyrus Gray has a pathway. Wouldn't put money on him making the team, but I do feel like special teams is going to be critical for that third running back spot, particularly if the Falcons are successful in sort of upping Tevin Coleman's workload this year. You look at last season with Teron Ward in that spot. Outside of the 3 games where he was basically filling in for an injured Tevin Coleman or an injured Devontae Freeman as the number 2 running back, he averaged about 5 offensive snaps last year, which were primarily third down situations. So a lot of his workload was really on special teams last season. And I think if Tevin Coleman is basically going to be more than a 3-carry guy, which is basically what he was last year, then those 5 snaps should easily go to Tevin Coleman. And so you're looking at the third running back hardly getting any opportunities on offense unless there's an injury. So I do feel like special teams is going to matter, particularly for that spot. I think that's why Teron Ward still has probably a better than average chance of winning that job just because he's a known commodity. And I do feel like Cyrus Gray, if he has an opportunity to sort of perform on special teams over these next 3 preseason games, will be able to put himself in a position where he might be able to snatch that spot as well. He was a standout special teams player for the Chiefs. I believe Dave Tube, their special teams coordinator who used to coordinate the great Bears special teams units, called him a critical piece of their special teams a couple of years ago before he got hurt. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, let's talk about the Redskins game. Now, the Falcons won the game. They beat the Redskins 23-17. There was a little bit of a comeback towards the end with the Redskins, but the Falcons were able to hold them off. Scott, I'm curious, which were the players that you thought really stood out in that game that you, in your eyes, were MVPs, I guess?
Devondre Campbell looked amazing. He looked like he was ready to come in and start and play that coverage linebacker role. I was impressed with pretty much all the linebackers. I thought they were playing really well. Even Warlow, when I went back and watched, looked solid at the weak side linebacker spot. I loved watching the guards. Outside of Mike Person, everybody seemed to do really well in pass blocking. Outside of, there were some guys that had some issues in as far as pass blocking and run blocking, tackle, but I thought the guards did a good, solid job. I thought Ben Garland did a really solid job at center. I guess I feel like it's more in the trenches in these kind of games. C.J. Goodwin did really well. And then Aldrick Robinson, of course. He looked amazing.
Okay. Yeah, I think several of those players, I agree with you. I thought Deion Jones played very well for his first NFL debut. I thought he was he was at least much more impressive from my perspective than Devondre Campbell was. Schweitzer, I thought, played well, even though I think part of that was because I had very low expectations, and I do feel like a lot of the other players on the second string offensive line did not play particularly well. So I think he sort of stood out a little bit extra in that regard. Matt Shaw played very well. It was nice to see a backup quarterback for the Falcons actually look like they belonged in the NFL, which has been a rare occurrence these last few preseasons. Obviously, Aldrick Robinson played well. I thought Brandon Wilds did some good things. I thought Claiborne looked very good. Granted, he was going up against like a backup left tackle who really wasn't even a left tackle, but was playing left tackle because Trent Williams wasn't playing. But, if you're a good player and you're playing, an Arena League journeyman, you should look good, and that's what Claiborne did, so you get full credit from me. So those were some of the guys that I thought really stood out. Nobody really in the, deep on the roster I thought really had a really great game. I thought Norley Cappy probably among like the people that you would call third stringers probably looked the best just because his first step was so much better than anybody else he was playing on the field with and really gave some of those backup Redskin linemen some fits. So if I was going to say anybody that played in the second half quite a bit really popped on tape, then it was probably Cappy.
But I agree. I didn't think there was a lot of great pass rush though.
Yeah. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Scott, where were some of the players that you were, it's a preseason game, so you got to take all of this really with somewhat a grain of salt. But where were some of the guys that you thought didn't quite live up to your expectations?
I mean, it's a preseason game. I was expecting the offense to be kind of, off. And first preseason game, offense always looks like they're going to struggle. And this was no different. Offense looks like they're going to struggle. I remember last year, offense looked like they were going to struggle for part of the preseason. And it's just a lot of people freak out too early for one game. It doesn't work. You're asking too much too quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think people tend to have a tendency to go one of two ways. Either this player didn't look good and therefore they're going to be terrible and they need to be benched, they need to be cut, or this player looked good and they need to be the starter and they're going to be a superstar. And you get both reactions from preseason games, which I think are kind of silly. But that all being said, there were a couple of guys that I was a little disappointed with. I was a little underwhelmed with. Not to suggest that means that they're in for a bad season. I don't think it really has anything to do with that. But I was expecting a little bit more. I think Matt Ryan is prominent. I thought his first series was a rough one. I thought his second series was fine. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see more of him to sort of figure out which one he would have had he continued in the game. But if you're in Matt Ryan's shoes and, you're trying to get off to a good start, you could have done a better job this season. I thought Mike Person, so much for the talk that, moving him to guard would lead to him looking much better. I thought he looked, at least comparing him to what he looked like last season, playing in the preseason at center versus what he looked like against the Redskins at guard, I thought he looked downright terrible. But, it's one game. It doesn't mean much. Jake Matthews.
Very, very much like J.R. Sweezy as a pass blocker. I'll put it that way.
Okay. So he was a Hall of Famer? Okay.
More like the Hall of Shamer, but.
Okay. I actually thought Alex Mack was a little underwhelming. Wasn't a bad game or anything, but, all I've been hearing all offseason is how Alex Mack, his introduction into the offensive line was going to instantly elevate this unit to greatness. As an individual, he was okay. Jake Matthews struggled, I thought, against Preston Smith in this game. I don't think that's necessarily an indicator that Jake Matthews is going to have a bad year. But it probably is a stronger indicator that Preston Smith is going to be really good in this league and is going to be a thorn in the side of many an NFC East tackle for the next 7 to 10 years. as opposed to the alternative. Derek Shelby was a little underwhelming to me just because, again, he's another one of those players that got quite a bit of offseason hype and just kind of looked average to me. And Akeem King was another player that, again, got quite a bit of offseason hype and was okay. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and suggest that any of these guys are in for a bad season. All of these guys could wind up being Pro Bowlers or something. So, I don't know, but just evaluating one preseason game, I was a little underwhelmed by a lot of these guys.
I mean, I can understand why.
Okay, Scott, let's turn our attention a little bit to the Falcons wrapped up training camp today. This is Tuesday. And let's turn our attention to some of the news that has come out of training camp since we last did this show last week, as well as talking a little bit about some of the injury updates for players that we can expect to see their first preseason action this Thursday against the Cleveland Browns. I guess the most prominent player that's, going to play this week that sat out last week is Keanu Neal, who missed, with that mysterious trunk injury, but he's expected to play. I'm curious, Scott, what do you expect to see from Neal in his NFL debut?
I expect to see a guy who might make some mistakes and might allow a big pass here or there, but when it comes down to it, he'll end up looking really good and he'll look like an asset for this team for a long time.
Yeah, I'm expecting at least one cleat-clearing hit in this game, that he's going to nail somebody that's going to get people really excited about that. As far as, mistakes he'll make, I think he'll probably be okay, early in this game. He might get confused on one play and give up a big play or something like that. But I think he's going to probably have an impressive debut, and he's going to be a guy that people are talking about next week, or at least we will be talking about next week on this show. Another player that I'm hoping to see more of against the Browns is Tevin Coleman. He dealt with he's got the sickle cell trait, and so when it was particularly hot this weekend, he got pulled out of practice. I think he only got maybe 2 carries against the Redskins, if I'm not mistaken. I'm hoping we get to see a little bit more of him, and I'm hoping, whatever issues he's been dealing with. I know he had a foot injury a couple of weeks ago. I hope he gets that opportunity against the Browns because, we've really only seen Tevin Coleman play one preseason game in his career, if we're being honest. So it is one of those things where the more work he gets, and he's another one of those guys that's been getting quite a bit of buzz this training camp. It would be nice to see that come to fruition on the field. So he's a guy that I hope we get to see more. What are your thoughts on sort of expectations for what Tevin Coleman can do?
I mean, I'm just expecting Tevin Coleman to show up and play, and I just hope he doesn't suck. That's my big thing. I hope he doesn't fumble it all the time again.
Okay. Another guy that's going to play against the Browns, who also missed last week's game against the Redskins, is Levine Toilolo, been dealing with a hand injury. Now, do you feel like Toilolo's injury is putting him in a position where he's on the outside looking in on the roster bubble, or do you feel like he still has the inside track to winning one of those 3 tight end spots this year?
I'm going to make this prediction right now. I don't see Levine Toilolo on the Falcons roster in 2016. I think Josh Perkins takes his spot. I think if Levine Toilolo is on the Falcons roster, it's because they kept 4 tight ends. Mainly because Perkins looked really good out there this past week. He looks like he's ready to go and come in and play that H-back-ish role that Shanahan loves to run. He was on all the special teams units for the first team for all the special teams units, and he looked good out there. And I just think Perkins is going to be the guy who ends up taking the roster spot, and I think Hooper is going to be the blocking tight end / red zone threat this year that we all wanted Levine Toilolo to somehow be his career, but he's just not been good.
Okay. I still feel like Tolo is going to make it, but I do feel like that every game he misses, and hopefully for his sake, he won't miss any more games. Opens the door for, I think, probably more likely than Josh Perkins, DJ Tialafea, just because I think they're so similar in terms of what their sort of skill sets are, which is primarily to be blockers, play some special teams and whatnot. I still feel like if push comes to shove, Toilolo is going to make the team, but I do feel like he's a lot more vulnerable after missing the Redskins game, and certainly needs to come back strong against Cleveland to help more solidify his hold on that roster spot. Now, three guys that won't be playing against the Browns. Dan Quinn indicated earlier this week that they would be ruled out for this game. Kicker Matt Bryant due to muscle tightness, which is kind of vague, but whatever. It's Matt Bryant. You don't want him cramping up out there. Teron Ward is also still dealing with the ankle injury that caused him to miss the Redskins game. Kamal Ishmael injured his shoulder against the Redskins game and also missed time. Do you feel like any of these three spots, kicker, running back, and backup strong safety, are wide open, and these guys missing time are going to potentially get them into trouble, say, when final roster decisions are made?
I think if Matt Bryant's just injured or he has like a season ender, I could see the Falcons giving him an injury settlement and just saying, you know what, you're 41 years old, you got 15 kids, like, it's time to retire, dude. We love you, but we'll give you your entire next year's salary and just go home, enjoy life. And then Nick Rose could come in and take the job. But I think unless like Matt Bryant tears his hamstring, I don't see us doing anything there. As far as backup strong safety, that is a position I could see being open. If it wasn't Damian Parms that they were putting in as the third string, I just don't think Damian Parms did well. I don't think he's a good football player. I think he's kind of shitty. When they did put Sherrod Niesman in there, Niesman looked good, but he was going against third and fourth stringers, and it was like the last 5 minutes of the game. So I really want to see more of Sherrod Niesman. I think he could be the guy that, if there is anybody that does dethrone Kamal Ishmael, it's going to be Niesman. And then at running back, Brandon Wilds looked really good. He looked like he did over at Carolina. The only issue that he had at Carolina was injuries, and he had a fumble this past week, but that's not standard for Brandon Wilds. He was not a guy who fumbled the ball a lot in college. I think he had 2 fumbles each year, which is pretty standard for all running backs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I do feel like Matt Bryant, as you said, basically he's going to have to, fall off of a building or something to not make the team. Nick Rose missing those kicks is not going to sit pretty when Falcons are making roster decisions. As I mentioned before when talking about Cyrus Gray, I do feel like Teron Ward is going to have to battle for his spot, and every game that he missed is going to hurt his chances. We saw last year with Anton Smith, who most of us thought was pretty safe on the roster, largely because of his ability, his outstanding special teams ability, and his explosiveness on offense was pretty safe despite missing games. He wound up getting cut. So Teron Ward, you better hope that this is the last game that you miss, because if you miss more than that, then it's going to be very hard pressed for you to make the team. I think Kamal Ishmael is pretty safe. Hopefully his shoulder injury isn't serious and it's just, he dinged it or whatever. I thought he played pretty well against the Redskins. I've been critical of Kamal Ishmael in the past, largely because I think people tend to overrate his ability as a starter, not necessarily because of his ability as a backup. I think he's a great backup. So I don't necessarily see anybody else on this team other than maybe Robinson Therese that can sort of do what he does as a backup. But yeah, I don't know about Niesman. I don't know about Parms yet. They haven't really impressed me enough to say that any one of those guys could challenge him for his roster spot. But there's 3 more games left, so I could be singing a different tune. So hopefully for Ishmael's sake, he doesn't let that door stay open. for those two guys to, impress. The last thing we should talk about going into this upcoming game against the Cleveland Browns, and this is probably, other than Keanu Neal, probably the most anticipated debut for a Falcon player this year, is Dwight Freeney is expected to play. I think Dan Quinn said around a quarter. I would be surprised if he gets a full quarter of action. I would expect him to get 2 series of action maybe, which might amount to being like 6 or 7 plays. But what are your expectations for what you expect to see from Dwight Freeney this week?
I'm hoping that we see about about 8 to 10 snaps, and we just get to see him come in and give us a spin move and hit a quarterback. I don't even need to see him sack a quarterback. I just want to see him hit somebody. I've been wanting to see Dwight Freeney in the red and black since 2002.
So basically ever since he came into the NFL?
Yes. Since he came into the league and had like 4 sacks as a rookie, I was like, man, Atlanta should have got him. I realized that he didn't fall to Atlanta, but had they been able to trade up, I mean, would it have been a better pick than TJ Duckett that year?
A lot of things would have been better picked than TJ Duckett that year. So
Didn't Ed Reed go like 3 picks later?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that was probably one of the worst picks in recent history. Because of TJ Duckett, I'm against running backs in the first round. Because of TJ Duckett.
Okay.
And he wasn't even that bad of a pick if he was taken in like the 3rd. But as a first-round running back, he just proved why you don't take first-round running backs.
Okay. Yeah. I was just looking it up to try to see if Joe Thomas was going to play this week, and it doesn't look like he is. He's dealing with a back issue. So I was looking forward to seeing Dwight Freeney go against Joe Thomas. I don't think we'll get to the opportunity to see that, but whoever the Browns' backup left tackle is, maybe we'll see Dwight Freeney wreck that dude. Bust out one spin move. I would like to see a sack, obviously. Now, like you, if he doesn't get one, then it's not going to be a big deal. But I just need that spin move one time, just one good spin, and I'll be happy.
Give me that spin move. Let me see him hit a quarterback. I'll be very happy.
All right, Scott, you got anything else you want to touch on before we get into the mailbag?
No, let's get into the mailbag.
Okay. All right, our first question comes from Jeff Brisden. I guess he's slumming it with the Falcon fans now. How much can I expect from Devondre Campbell as a rookie?
I think you're going to see a starter. I think you're going to see a guy who is excellent in coverage, who does his job as a true weak side linebacker, plays well against the run, and just ideally and mainly a coverage back.
Okay.
A coverage backer, I should say.
Yeah, I don't have super high expectations for Devondre Campbell as a rookie. Like, my expectations, I think, is that he's probably like an NFL average starter. Like, I think that's probably where his peak is, his ceiling is. I feel like one of the things that I noticed about Campbell when he was at Minnesota, and I saw glimpses of it against the Redskins, is that he's instinctually in his reading and recognition ability isn't quite up to par with other linebackers. At Minnesota, it wasn't a big deal because he was often the best athlete on the field. And so the fact that he was reacting half a second or a full second later than other players on the team didn't really affect things that much. But at the NFL level, that half second, that full second can make a difference and allow, top end players to get position against you and wreck you. And, I think that's going to be the issue that Campbell's going to have to deal with as a rookie. I don't think it's going to mean that he's going to struggle or let me rephrase that. He's going to be bad or anything like that. But I do feel like he's going to have his positive moments and his negative moments, and they'll probably balance out to be NFL average. But we'll see. Like, my expectation at this point is I think he'll probably start the season as a backup and finish as a starter. And I think that would be beneficial for him just because I think it'll give him a little bit more time to develop as opposed to being thrown out to the Wolves right away. But we'll see what happens. All right, Joshua Hammond at Wispa2000. He says, what are your thoughts concerning Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell so far?
I think Deion Jones is going to be a great linebacker for the Falcons eventually. I think right now he's going to be a solid fit for the scheme and everything the Falcons need. But I think long term, he's going to be a much better starting middle linebacker than anybody's given him credit for right now. As far as Campbell, long term starting weak side linebacker. I said that the minute they drafted him. I think he's the perfect fit for the scheme. I think he's exactly what Dan Quinn wanted when he said, oh, hey, look at all these guys in the draft. I want this guy right here. He's the guy who's going to make my team better. So I love Campbell. I think Campbell was needed within this defense. And I think he's going to show throughout the season just how good of a pick he was.
With Deion Jones, I was very impressed with him against the Redskins. Now, again, part of that was because I had very low expectations of the team's first four picks. I was most skeptical of the Deion Jones pick. I just didn't see him as a great fit at middle linebacker. I thought he played well against the Redskins. Now, that doesn't mean that my opinion is changed that much. I'm not going to change my opinion based off of one preseason game. But it does make me a little bit more optimistic that he is a little bit more NFL ready than I thought he was. And I feel like he has at least there's like a 12% chance more than I thought that he has the potential to have a rookie season close to what Quan Alexander had last year. Now, I thought Quan Alexander was a better player than Deion Jones at LSU. I also think Quan Alexander benefited from playing beside Levante David in Tampa Bay, which I think contributed to why Quan Alexander by some considerations, had a very good rookie season, particularly given that he was a fourth-round pick. I don't think Deion Jones is quite going to get that sort of boost, even though I'm a big fan of Sean Weatherspoon. I don't know at this point in his career he's on the same level as Levante David to basically clean up all the messes that Deion Jones finds himself into. But we'll see how it goes. I think Jones could be good. I think – I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was a week ago that Jones will actually prove me wrong and be good for the Falcons this year. So those are my thoughts. Okay, Jason at your boy J94 asks, why is Jalen Collins playing with the third unit backups?
Because the coaches are being stupid and it seems like they're punishing him instead of like getting him ready for the season.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate way. I think, they're doing what coaches do. He's like, well, he's not going to be there week one, so he's got to earn whatever. Hopefully it works. Like, hopefully, he takes it to heart and works that much harder to work his way back into the second unit with the first string. We'll see. But yeah, I think that's the reason why it is. I think it's, classic coaches. He's not going to be there week one, so why should we give him reps over somebody that potentially could be like Akeem King or C.J. Goodwin or Brian Poole?
I mean, and it makes sense. It's just frustrating because you're like, this guy is going to be the starter when he comes back, or like the starting nickel. So you're just like, why are we sitting here not getting him used to the team?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is this. Jalen Collins is going to play this year, whether he deserves it or not. Like, they need to find out where Jalen Collins is at this point this year. And if that means, 11 games of him struggling, of getting burnt, then that's what it's going to mean. So you would like to see him get more opportunities at some point this preseason. I don't know if that's going to come this week, but I'm sure by that fourth preseason game he'll get plenty of action as a starter. But until then, the coaches will do what they do, and hopefully, they get paid the big bucks to make these type of decisions, and hopefully it ends up working out for the Falcons. Okay. Andrew Schauweiler asks, do you think Matt Ryan can replicate last year's Russell Wilson's stats last year? I feel like cutting down Matt's number of throws would limit the interceptions. Wilson last year threw the ball 483 times, but had 34 touchdowns and 8 interceptions.
I mean, I hope he does. That'd be great. That'd help the Falcons a lot if he did. I don't see it happening, but it'd be amazing.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It'd be nice if it happened, but I mean, look, the reason why Russell Wilson is able to play that way with not throwing the ball that much is because Seattle is really good at running the football and they have a really good defense. And when you can keep games low scoring, that allows you to run the football even more. I'll throw out some numbers. I did some research. Over the last 4 years, which has been the 4 years that Russell Wilson has been in the league, the Seahawks have run the ball 2,071 times. That's the most in the NFL. That's actually 20% more than the NFL average in that span. Meanwhile, the Falcons have run the ball about 1,500 times, which is, I think, 31st in the league, which is about 15% less than the NFL average. The Seahawks, over that span, have averaged 4.7 yards per carry, which is the second highest in the NFL. Taking into account the Falcons' yards per carry last season, the quote-unquote best season that they've had running the football in a long time, they averaged 3.8 yards per carry and were 25th in the NFL. So the reality is, if you're going to run the ball, if you're going to limit Matt Ryan's passing attempts, you got to be able to run the ball a lot better than the Falcons have done over the years and even last year. On the other side of the situation with the defense, Seattle has allowed the league's lowest number of points allowed over the last 4 years, which is about 1,007, which is about 30% less than the NFL average. The Falcons are about the NFL average. I think it's about 3% more at about 1,500. So it is one of those things where unless you basically can, like this, the way I would compare it is the Seahawks running the football and playing defense are elite. They're the Tom Brady of running the football. They're the Tom Brady, the Aaron Rodgers of playing defense. Meanwhile, the Falcons are kind of the Andy Dalton or the Ryan Tannehill. So unless we can turn our running game and our defense both into elite units, and then on top of that, you can get Matt Ryan to play a different style of football, which is going to be a lot more taking deep shots down the field and whatever, then you're probably not going to see him replicate Russell Wilson's production. But that doesn't mean that Matt Ryan can't produce, but it just won't be quite the same as Russell Wilson.
He'll never be a single-digit interception guy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I think where guys like Wilson, even a young Michael Vick in like 02, and even Aaron Rodgers, they don't throw a lot of interceptions because their mobility allows them to basically extend plays, so they're not looking to get rid of the ball. It leads them to taking a lot of sacks, and you look at those guys, the number of sacks they've taken over their careers, they routinely take 40, 50 sacks every year. That's not going to be Matt Ryan's game. And so he's instead, when he gets into situations, into trouble, instead of scrambling around and trying to extend plays with their legs, he's going to check it down or he's going to throw it away. And occasionally, like we saw in the second half of last season, sometimes he's going to force the ball to Julio, which is going to lead to him throwing a few too many interceptions than we would like. But yeah, he's always going to be probably one of those guys that gets 12 to 15 picks in a year. Okay. The King of the Heathens, at Toya That on Twitter, he asks, what's your take on the guard the Falcons drafted?
Talking about Schweitzer, I thought he did good. I thought he was pass protecting well. I thought he got good push in the running game. He seemed to really understand his role within the offense as a zone blocker. And I liked what he could do. I think he could compete by the end of the year for a starting job at left guard if Levitri gives us a shitty season like he did last year.
Okay. Yeah, like I said earlier, I thought he had an impressive debut. I think part of that was because I was very disappointed in person. I thought Garland had his share of struggles. Bryce Harris was not very good. Tom Compton was okay. But it was very clear that Schweitzer, at least in the Redskin game, was the best of the second string offensive lineman from my perspective. And there weren't any major negatives from him. It was just a couple of plays here and there where I wish he would have gotten a little bit more push. But that was sort of his issue at San Jose State. He's not really a guy that's great off the snap. He's more of a, let me get downfield and let me take out linebackers sort of player, which I thought he did very well against the Redskins. So that's his strength. As far as him being a starter, I still think he's got a ways to go before I would put him in that position. Levitri and Chester aren't great, but they're relatively known commodities, and they'd have to be pretty bad for me to think that Schweitzer is going to be an upgrade over either one of those spots. But knowing those two guys, being terrible is not necessarily out of the realm of possibility. So we'll see what happens at the end of the year. Okay, Khalil from at Jim and I Unruly asks, if Aldrick Robinson keeps performing in the preseason, can he steal the third wide receiver spot from Justin Hardy?
No. Hardy's pretty much locked into that third wide receiver role. When the Falcons have three receivers on the field, expect Hardy to be in that outside role with Sanu more in the slot is kind of what it's looking like. I'm not a huge fan of that alignment, but it could also mean a lot more of Julio in the slot too. I do think Hardy was drafted, and his role this year is pretty much defined. Like, he'll be in the slot, he'll be outside. He's going to come in and be that third receiver, and he's going to be on those third downs, those 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, carving up the intermediate part of the field like a more competent Harry Douglas.
Okay. Yeah, I think the answer is the same. The answer is no. Aldrick Robinson, I'm a big fan of his, been a big fan of his for many, many years, at least 5 years, going back to his last year at SMU. He's essentially a specialist. That's what he is. He's good at running the go routes. He's running deep posts. But outside that, he's not going to really bring a whole lot to the table, at least in this offense. And what Hardy brings to the table, he's not going to be that vertical threat, but he does open up a lot more of the route tree, option routes, slants, outs, curls, comebacks, all those sorts of things that you expect. He can run routes 1 through 7 essentially, or 1 through 6 or whatever, as opposed to Robinson, who's really just a 7, 8, 9 guy, the deep stuff. And for that reason alone, they're going to want Hardy out there because he gives them a lot more versatility and flexibility with their offense. I think with Robinson, I think what he can do this preseason is to make it to a point where he's not just a guy that's going to play 10 snaps or 15 snaps or whatever the number 4 receiver in this offense is going to play. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many snaps Nick Williams played, but he could be a regular part of the offense just because of the vertical potential, if the play action passing is working. And sort of basically what he's working to be is to be a regular option as the 4th receiver and get the Falcons to sort of rethink their usage of 4 receivers, because they don't put 4 receivers on the field that often. It's usually 3 receivers, 2 tight ends, or whatever. So I think that's where Robinson's really working at it. The interesting thing I saw in the Redskins game was Hardy did not play any snaps in the slot while Sanu was in the game. Sanu got the vast majority of the slot snaps when they were playing together throughout the first quarter of that game. And so it does lend credence to the possibility that the Falcons sort of envision Sanu filling in for Leonard Hankerson, the exact same role that Leonard Hankerson had last year, and sort of relegating Hardy to being more of the Roddy White in this year's offense. So hopefully, unlike Roddy White, Hardy won't be an afterthought in the offense. And we'll see if that sort of holds up for these next 3 preseason games, but that is something to keep an eye on going into the season. Just seeing if this is going to be what we saw a repeat of last year, where the offense is featuring 2 guys, which is Julio, and this year Sanu. Last year it was Hankerson, and sort of the third guy is an afterthought. And that was Roddy last year, and obviously this year it's going to be Hardy. So that's something to keep an eye on. And, for all you guys that hate Kyle Shanahan, that'll be something else for you to complain about in October if that ends up happening. Okay, this is going to be the most heated battle, I think, of the night, Scott. Matt James asks, the pros and cons of boneless wings.
All right,
I got some takes.
We're gonna start with the pros. All right, the pros. The pros are you can put any sauce you want on them, just like regular wings. A lot of times they're white meat as opposed to the dark meat, so it's like chicken breast as opposed to the thighs. So it's like, hey, all right, it might be a little better for you. I mean, you're eating fried wings, but maybe you want to get a little healthier.
2% better, yes. Yeah,
2% better. And then the third thing is you can eat them with a fork. So if you don't feel like getting wing shit all over your hands, there you go. What are your pros on this one?
I don't have any pros on boneless wings. I don't think there's any benefit to eat. I mean, I guess you just named the 3 of them, but I don't look at any of those as pros. Like, eating wings with a fork. Why am I eating wings? The different. Yeah, I'm eating something that's deep fried, and I'm like worried about white meat versus dark meat. Like, come on, like my priorities are elsewhere. To me, the cons are they don't taste as good, even though they have the same sauce. It's much more satisfying to look at your plate and seeing a bunch of gnawed on bones than crumbs of whatever. I guess, for some people, one pro is that they're easier to dip. But, I'm personally not a huge fan of dipping wings in the ranch or blue cheese. I think if you're spending too much time dipping, if you're worrying about dipping it, then you shouldn't be eating wings in the first place, because it's really about the sauce that's on the wings, not what you dip them in. I'm just not a big fan of boneless wings. Like, if you go to McDonald's and your only option is chicken nuggets, then you eat chicken nuggets. But if you have the option of eating bone-in wings or boneless wings, then in my opinion, you choose 100% of the time bone-in wings. Because if you choose boneless wings, you don't really want wings. You want something else. So, all cons for me.
I mean, I guess for me, I'll eat boneless wings if they're an option, but it's not my first option. It's more like I'm drunk and I can't find my mouth, so here's boneless wings kind of option. Like, I feel like that's the acceptable time to do it. Or, hey, like, there's a child among us. Let me not look like a heathen, with all this nasty crap all over my face and in my beard. But, I mean, if I have the option between bone-in and boneless wings, I'm going to pick the ones with the bones in them, because that's how wings are meant to be cooked. Because bones in the wing add flavor. You get all the tendons and grease and stuff that add flavor to the actual meat that you're eating. The sauces get everywhere. It's great. That's part of the fun of boneless wings. That you have to pick up some fries to get the sauce coating off your hands, or you have to sit there and lick your fingers. Like, that's the fun of boneless wings. And yes, I eat fries with my wings because that's the way Americans do it.
Not going to complain about your fry eating behavior, Scott. So, I don't get the whole boneless wings thing. Like, they shouldn't be called wings. They're nuggets with sauce. I don't know. Like, I'm a fan of chicken tenders. I'm a fan of nuggets. I'm a fan of, obviously, bone-in wings. I'm not a big fan of boneless wings. To me, it's like one of those things where they're like, ooh, we can get combine two things and make it better, and I think it makes it worse. I'm not a fan of them at all, so I tend to question people's masculinity when they eat boneless wings. If you ever come to my house, you're not eating boneless wings. You're getting thrown out if you try to eat boneless wings in my house.
I mean, I'm not going to throw someone out because they like chicken nuggets. Just call them what they are. They're chicken nuggets. So you like buffalo sauce in your chicken nuggets. Cool. So does my girlfriend. We'll go to Chick-fil-A. She'll get buffalo sauce, and she'll put them on her chicken nuggets. But don't sit there and call them wings. They're not wings.
Go. All right, folks. That's our show. So, guys, if you want more boneless wing takes, if you want Aaron's opinion on steak sauce, Aaron's not a fan of steak sauce, by the way. You can ask that question.
It's great on burgers, though.
Yeah, it is actually pretty good on burgers. You're right. But if you want to ask weird, random questions about food, or you want to ask about the Falcons, you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can also tweet at me or Scott. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. The show also has a Twitter handle that's at Falcons PFC. Subscribe to us on iTunes. You can check us out. You can find all the links at profootballcentral.com. If you do check us out on iTunes, please give us a rating and a review. That helps other people find us. And if you're curious, if you feel like spending 30 minutes reading, then you can go to falcfans.com. I wrote a very long piece breaking down every player that played against the Redskins. You can get my opinions on everybody, all like 84 guys that played in that game. I'll probably do the same thing for this upcoming Browns game, if presumably I get the time. So you can look forward to that stuff. And Scott, if you got anything you want to plug, go right ahead.
I don't really have anything. I haven't really been writing lately just because I've been busy with life and Pokemon. So I've been doing the show, and I'll watch more football. I'll be in Myrtle Beach this weekend watching the game from the beach. So I may not be tweeting it throughout, but I'm excited. I don't know how excited any of y'all are, but I'm excited to watch the Falcons beat the Browns. And if they don't, it's preseason. It doesn't matter.
There you go.
I love that excuse this time of year.
Yes. It's the only time I don't get mad at the Falcons losing games.
Whatever, they're just evaluating guys.
Yeah.
They pulled their starters in the first quarter. They pulled their starters in the second quarter. Oh, they pulled their starters before the game even started in the fourth game.
There you go. All right, guys, that's our show this week. We will be back next week to talk about the Falcons-Browns and whoever we play after that. I completely think the Dolphins or whoever it is. So that's it.